Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm your host, JR Rainbolt. In this episode, we are going to be talking with Tyler Allen. He is the host of the true crime podcast, Minds of Madness. We'll be joined also by several students from the Chicago School's Criminology and Forensic Psychology departments, and they will be presenting questions and engaging in conversation with Tyler throughout our chat today. Tyler will talk briefly about his podcast and how he got started in that profession. He is also going to discuss a case. We will also hear from the private investigator that worked on that case with Tyler, Shane Waters. Also, during the show, we're going to hear from Jennifer's son, who was only 18 months old at the time of her death. Welcome, Tyler.
My name is Tyler Allen. I'm the host of the Minds of Madness podcast. Almost my entire life, probably way back from like the 80s, I started, watching whatever documentaries and stuff were available and, 48 hours and all that kind of stuff. I was all over true crime. I have a background in film and television. I went to school for radio television, and then ended up, when I graduated, I ended up getting into film and cutting sound for film. So basically, I was a huge audio fan. Growing up, it was old-time radio. My grandmother introduced me to Jack Benny and Orson Welles, and, started listening to all these radio dramas. And then, of course, that led into audiobooks. And then I reached a point where I kind of started trying to find other venues to listen to things. I had a job that I worked pretty much by myself, so I'd wear my earbuds all day. And I was looking for stuff, and that's kind of when I got into podcasts. It was around the same time as the Making a Murderer came out for Netflix. And I remember at one point in time, everybody was getting into that show. And I was Googling, what do I do next? What do I watch? And then people started, posting about, podcasts are another great option. So I started listening to podcasts, and Serial definitely dragged me in. I was hooked after listening to Serial, and basically went through all the mainstream ones and started listening to independent produced podcasts where, people in the basement were doing a show. And with my background, my wife's also a television director, so we have the technical skills. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this thing out. And so for Christmas, I asked for a microphone, and that's kind of how it started. I started producing our podcast in 2016. Our first release was in January of 2017. And yeah, so, like I was saying, my wife runs the show. I did about 5 episodes, which are no longer even available because we've taken them down because they were so bad. But yeah, I started doing it on my own, and I was asking for help from my wife because she knows how to write, a lot better than I do. And so she started taking over the script writing, and then the editing. She was sitting with me, and then realized, it would be faster for her to start editing. And then, yeah, so that went on for about 4 years. And then we reached a point where we could start hiring people. So now we have a team of 5 writers. We had 11 people on staff last year, but we've scaled it down a bit. So we've got, in total, people that work on the show, it's about 9, I think. And yeah, we've got almost 80 million downloads since we started. And I've just been loving this. I left my my full-time job 2 years ago, and now I podcast full-time. And then we used to be in the basement. In fact, actually, the first time we were on morning television, we were introduced as the couple who produces their podcast in the basement. And it was a long-running joke between everybody in the industry. They like to tease me that I lived in the basement. And then we built this, and I've got my own studio now, and it's in the backyard in one of those prefabricated buildings. And yeah, I get to talk all day to myself. So that's kind of how it started. It's monstrous. So I'm going to only talk about it. We did it in a 4-part series, and I'm going to talk about the first one and the first episode, which kind of sets the stage for what's going on. And it's just bonkers. But I got to give you the backstory and how we ended up doing it. So it was episode 81, and it was called the Farmville Murders. Now, this isn't the case I'm talking about, but it leads into how we ended up doing this one I'm going to talk about. So it was a quadruple homicide in Farmville, Virginia. This kid met a girl on it's called horrorcore. which is like, it's like horror themed rapping music. They have all these forums. And I guess this guy, his name was Samuel McCroskey. He was a horrorcore rapper as well. I mean, very amateur. And he went by the name Psycho Sam. And so he met this girl. Her name was Emma Niederbrook. And they formed an online relationship. He lived in California. She was in Virginia. And I guess there was a concert near Emma's house in Virginia. So after a while of chatting, I guess they were calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend. They make this plan that he's going to fly down from California, spend a week at her house. And at the beginning of the trip, they were going to go to this concert, which was a couple hours drive from where Emma lived. And so mom was going to take them. They were going to stay at a hotel for the weekend, do this concert, and then go back, and he was going to spend a week or the rest of the week at her house. Anyways, once they meet in person, everything just goes sideways. She wasn't digging him at all, and basically made it clear that she didn't, in real life, it just wasn't working out. So this guy kind of loses his mind and ends up killing her stepmother and father and a friend of hers. And the crazy part of it was he lived in the house for a week because he had a plane ticket. He had to get back to California. And so he's staying at the house. He's got the bodies in the basement, and he's telling people are actually coming to the door and looking for the family that lives there. And he's like, oh, they're out shopping, doing whatever. Anyways, he eventually gets caught. So this story, I mean, the fact that this guy, I mean, we're always looking for cases that, have something a little bit more of a twist to it than husband kills wife over life insurance, or, those kind of stories, which is pretty much, the bulk of most true crime stories. There's not a lot of twists and turns to it, but this one was very interesting. And so we reached out to one of the artists that performed at that concert, and his name is Andy Sherm. His stage name is Sick Tannic. So he had actually performed, knew the kids, because I guess the community of horrorcore at that time was pretty small. And so he was on the boards, and he had interacted with these people before as well. So, and this guy, I mean, really charming guy. I mean, you listen to his music, it's frightening stuff where you listen to it and you just can't picture, you expect these people to be angry all the time and everything, but he's like totally cool, very well spoken, and just a really, really nice guy. So we do the interviews, and in the course of doing the interviews, he said to my wife, Beck, he's like, oh, I have a connection to true crime myself. And his mother had been killed in a motel in 1985. But I was double checking earlier when I was going over my notes, and I asked my wife, and he said no, she said she was killed and dumped by a bush in front of an apartment building in 1985. And she was also a sex worker, or a part-time sex worker. So we were like, oh, okay. And really got to know this guy and felt connected to him. And we do have resources available to us. So we were like, okay, well, maybe we'll find something out, because he didn't know anything. It happened when he was 18 months old. So he didn't have any memory of his mother. Really, he's just got a couple photos of her and anything that his family had told him, which was very, very minimal. So, it happens. Beck finds the cold case detective that was working on it with the Albuquerque police, because this happened in Albuquerque, and puts Andy in touch with the detective. Basically, she just gave him a short, we're still working on it, it's cold, but it's still an active case, and sent a 1-page case file to him. And so, we're thinking to ourselves, like, we really want to help this guy, but something had happened in the 80s. You're not going to find a lot online, certainly. And then, of course, sex worker murders aren't really, investigated. Like, I'm not going to say aren't, but it has happened where they haven't been investigated thoroughly. It's the nature of the business, and people just don't put as much time into those kind of investigations. Now, I would say that's not the same now, but you kind of have that idea that, well, in 1980, that might have been a problem. So we're thinking to ourselves, we really want to help this guy, but we don't really know, like, what are we going to get? And I remember having a conversation with him, and got off the phone, and I'm talking with Beck, and I'm like, what are we going to do? Like, I don't know how we're going to be able to find anything out, because that's huge. Trying to find information on something like that, especially something that long ago, is near impossible. So he was supposed to get a call back from the investigating detective. She stopped returning his calls, and it pretty much went, radio silent. There was nothing going on. And one of the other things about Andy is he's battled cancer twice and beat it during his life. He's had a lot of health problems. And so there was one night, sure it was during the beginning of the pandemic, and I was just sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram, and I see a post from Andy, and he's basically telling his fans that his cancer's back. And this time around, it's pretty serious. And so I said to Becca, I'm like, we got to do something for him. Like, we'll do an episode, with as much information as we can. We'll get him on, and we'll have him talking about, what it was like growing up without his mother, and we just wanted to give him something, in case he passed. So anyway, we end up looking into it. We're pulling up very minimal information. And that's when we get a friend of ours who's a private investigator involved. His name is Shane Waters, an amazing individual. And he ends up starting to dig, and puts in a FOIA request, case file of 180 pages. And it was like an onion. It was layers and layers and layers of just craziness. And what we thought would be a very hard 40-minute episode to produce ended up becoming a 4-part series. And this case is just crazy. I mean, it goes from, child marriage, grooming, then it goes to, meth cooking in Albuquerque. We interview a detective who's talking about one of the characters in the story as the original Walter White from Breaking Bad, because he's cooking meth out in an RV out in the wastelands of Albuquerque. This series ends with a possible connection to the largest unsolved murder case in Albuquerque history. And do you guys know what that might be? The West Mesa murders. Have you heard of it? 11 women murdered and buried out in the West Mesa. It's unsolved. It's crazy. So we start looking into this. We've got this huge case file, and then Beck's, she's on the ground on the phone calling people, and the craziest thing happens. Every single call, email to law enforcement, to other organizations that work with sex workers, any call or email that she made, within minutes, we were getting responses, like people were calling her back, or we were getting emails and just mentioning Jennifer Sherm's name. And that has never happened to us in the entire history of podcasting. We have to chase down interviews, and a lot of times we'll get an email back with a quick answer, and no, we don't want to participate in your podcast, and no, we can't talk about this, especially with cold cases. With cold cases, they're not, law enforcement aren't going to talk much about it, because of course they can't reveal the information, or else it could potentially endanger the investigation. But in this one, we were getting calls back, and we couldn't believe it. And it was because of the tie-in to the West Mesa, which they're still investigating. So I do have some audio files, and can I share my screen?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Should be able to.
They could not get me out of the closet. I think I was in there for like 3 or 4 hours. And anytime they'd open the door, I would just scream at the top of my lungs because I was immobilized with fear. At first, it was just, my mom's gone. And then it became, your mom was taken by a bad man.
They found video of him killing women.
Every time we ever had any encounters with him, he was always our. If you'd ever watched any episodes of Breaking Bad, that's exactly what you would see.
He buried these 11 women and kept going out there. He made a road going out there.
You got this dude, saying, hey, I'm going to show your family these pictures, and like he's secretly taping her.
The cops don't care. We're nothing to them.
Dumped her like a piece of garbage,
I don't see anything that screams there's 2 people doing this.
I never thought anything was going to come of this case, ever.
That was the video teaser we did for this episode. I mean, there's a couple more. I mean, obviously this popped up. I've got some audio files here I can share if you want to actually hear the people involved in this episode. We've got Andy, who's victim's son, and he was raised by his grandmother. No real knowledge about his mother.
I sat in
Hear
a
it?
car seat in the back of this old 68 Ford Galaxy. And it was yellow with a black top with a banana boat. And my grandma would take me to school. And we were talking elementary school. And that's how I'd arrive. She dropped me off like right at the fence. And so all the kids would see me. And for the longest time, I called to other people. I called my grandma my mom. Kids would ask, "Is that your mom?" Eventually, it was like this pressure because you get so many kids asking and they're super mean. I got made fun of a lot because I didn't have a mom, literally. Like that was the thing. I didn't understand what happened to her or why I didn't have a mom. Like I remember there was times whenever I was younger that I thought my mom was just gone, not dead, but out of town or something. That was probably my way of trying to cope. Eventually, it came to a point where I was getting bullied really, really bad.
You're the kid who don't have a mom. You're a kid who don't have parents. You're the kid who gets dropped off by his grandma every day.
Eventually, the bullying got so bad, Andy's family and school agreed some sort of intervention was needed.
I think I was about 6 years old, maybe. It was myself, my grandma, I believe my Aunt Judy, and then principal and my teacher, and then all the kids in my class. The principal took the lead, and he tried to explain to kids that had parents what it was like not having parents. And I mean, you can imagine that's like impossible. It's like just as impossible for me to envision having parents. My grandma and my aunt, they didn't go into any details. They didn't want to discuss the murder or anything, but basically what they said was like a bad man took her. And this is to my class. This is to all the kids. The purpose was to try get these kids to understand, like, I'm in a unique situation. You know, looking back now, that was that was a terrible fucking idea. The bullying just got worse and worse and worse, and eventually, I left school. They ended up passing me. It was probably around then, 6th grade, where everything really hit. I just kind of put two and two together, like, this is what happened to my mom. And I had a really tough time. I started acting out. It was like seventh grade is where I took all that sadness and me getting bullied, and I fought back. I've gone through these stages throughout my life where I've obviously tried to find different coping mechanisms and different ways to deal with this.
For Andy, another difficult aspect about growing up without a mom was how the circumstances of her death seemed to overshadow everything else about her life and identity.
So like I didn't get to learn like odd little things. My cousin Andrea told me her favorite cereal was Cheerios. I know she liked to draw and paint. She was an artist.
When Andy finally did learn how his mother died and about her lifestyle, he experienced another traumatic time in his life.
Once I understood that not only was my mom dead, but she was put to death in a very brutal fashion. And not only that, I had to come to terms with the fact she was on drugs. I had to come to terms with the fact that she was a prostitute. Boy, let me tell you, people really treat you different when they find out that your dead mother was a prostitute.
Yeah, that's Andy. And he went through a whole range of emotions throughout this. Now, this series took us 2 years to produce. Those interviews were all from various times when he was available over the 2 years. And it was a lot for him because he didn't know much about his mom. And then all of a sudden we're presenting him with all this information. I mean, we got, autopsy reports and police reports and so much. It was very overwhelming for him. But I mean, you listen to this guy talk and then you listen to his horrorcore music, and it's hard because he just sounds like, this really, hurt little boy that's having to deal with all of these problems throughout his life of, trying to come to grips with what's happening in his family and being raised by his grandmother. So basically, that was an introduction to Andy, just talking about, what he was like. Here's Ryan talking about the challenges of trying to produce an episode with the little information we had during the time.
The first thing that I knew would be tough about this case is the fact that no one had ever looked into this one before. That means that there's no documentaries made about it. There's no other podcasts that have covered it. There's nobody else that has compiled a list of sources to look into for this case. So everything we were going to do was going to be completely from scratch. And that's when I realized we definitely needed a little bit of extra help if we were going to really do this story. And that's when we decided to reach out to Shane.
Shane gets involved, and he really runs with this. And he got the 180-page file. As the story progresses, you find out there's how the whole West Mesa thing gets involved. And then the main suspect in this is actually behind bars. And he ends up writing this guy in prison, but he never wrote back. So we couldn't get an interview. In fact, actually, the prison wasn't even going to allow us to come in and record anything because they had a policy of not giving perpetrators a platform to talk about their crimes. So basically, any information that we would have gleaned from that inmate would have been through letters and possibly phone calls.
FOIA request. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you don't even know what they have, so you don't know what to even ask for. And depending on who you're dealing with, they may give you everything you ask for. They may make it really difficult for you. They may give you nothing at all.
I've worked a number of Jane Doe cases dealing with sex workers from the mid-'80s, and something that's always the case for these cases is that the case files are typically a single or 2 pages, and most of the time they're handwritten, hard to read, and there's no physical evidence still left, unfortunately. And one thing that really shocked me is when we requested the case file, what was delivered to us was 180 pages of the case file.
And this wasn't just useless paperwork that didn't matter. This was real information, hard information. It was Jennifer's real case file. It was interviews with every suspect police talked to. It was many different officers' versions of the same events, handwritten and then typed up. It was honestly way more than I ever expected to get. And really, once you started digging into it and reading all the words and all the details, suddenly you actually have this very vivid picture of what police knew at the time, what people were saying. All of a sudden, the name Jennifer Sherm wasn't just a Google search term or a term that I was putting in the newspaper archives to look up. All of a sudden, Jennifer Sherm was the name of this witness's friend, this witness's girlfriend, this witness's family member. And all of a sudden, Jennifer Sherm became a very real person, and you got to see what other people thought of her, felt about her, knew about her from so many different perspectives.
Within that 180 pages, we could see that these detectives, they gathered so much information. They collected a lot of forensic evidence, and all of that evidence was very carefully sealed, and then it was carefully stored away. Like, how ideal is that? And it's so unique to a case that involves someone who was a sex worker when they were murdered.
So that was pretty much how everything got started. And once everything started rolling with the episodes, we realized we had more material than we could have ever imagined to create these episodes. So May 29th, 1985 is when Jennifer was murdered. She was found outside in an apartment complex at 187 Monte Largo Drive, which is 400 yards from East Central Avenue. Now, East Central Avenue in the 80s, they had a number of nicknames. I think it was called the Stroll in the beginning. Then it became the Cruise. Now they call it the War Zone. It's where the seedier things in the city happen. And another interesting thing about this was if you Google 187 slang, which I had no idea about this, they say the number 187 is used by gangs throughout the United States and elsewhere. It's a synonym for murder. So because there was no suspects at the initial time, they knew it was a sex worker that had been dropped at this location. but they were wondering maybe perhaps if it was like a message to somebody or some gang affiliation or whatever. So this 187, I thought that was kind of neat because I'd never heard of that. So we find out about the murder, the investigation. And I think the most unique part about this investigation is that the police did their due diligence in this. They bagged and collected so much physical evidence and stored it away. And this is in 1985. This is before, DNA was a thing, where they didn't even know that this would be a thing. But they kept the evidence and physical evidence, which later plays a major part in ruling out suspects, for one, because there was one suspect, a former boyfriend, that looked like he could have been the one, and he was completely ruled out by DNA. And then, of course, it's the physical evidence that ties her murder into the West Mesa. But it's the early life of Jennifer that once we really started finding out about this case when she was 12 years old. And it's egregious what happened to her. She's 12 years old. She's at middle school and doing what kids do when they get into trouble. She's out with a friend and they're across the street from the school smoking a joint. And while they're sitting there, they hear a voice of a man from behind them. And he says, hey, you better be careful. And they turn around and it's a 57-year-old man named Frank Turkle. He's a deputy sheriff in Albuquerque. And basically, he wasn't warning them that, they better be careful. It was more of kind of like a pickup line to be able to start talking to these young girls. He eventually gets Jennifer over to his place over the course of months. He ends up grooming her. His house becomes a hangout for the local kids. He's supplying drugs and alcohol. And now one of the most ironic things about this Turkle guy is that he ran for sheriff, and his campaign promise, one of his campaign promises, was to rid the county of its moral pollution. And when he says his moral pollution, he was referring to drugs, and specifically children with drugs. And the irony of the situation is that Frank is the guy supplying the kids with drugs. So, and he's married. And we've got this monstrous folder of, news clippings and stuff like that we were able to find. And he was regularly in the newspaper. And I guess back in the 80s, and, not a lot was going on. Or, actually, this would have been 70s, probably like 70, 74, 78. So not a lot was going on. There was we came across an article about him and his wife hosting a dinner party. And it was like, oh, so-and-so were at this dinner party at the Turkles. So he was a deputy sheriff. He got promoted to a sheriff's captain. He was on the city council for a while, and then he tried to run for sheriff. And in the meantime, he's grooming this 12-year-old and feeding her with drugs. The speculation, now we don't know this for sure, but the speculation was, to get her addicted to it. So he had control, right? Because he's the guy with the drugs. So Jennifer's spending a lot of time over at his place. We're talking about Andy's mom, who was 12 years old at the time. And now we figure this is the catalyst. And in Andy's words, he thinks it's the catalyst of what led her on the path that she got on. And so he's at his place and he starts taking nude photos of her. Frank Turkle's not a bright guy. He's writing names and dates on the back of his Polaroids. And so, of course, that's going to come back and haunt you, especially if the police are investigating you, which it did. And kids are coming to the house, drinking, doing drugs, and people are talking. The community is talking because, kids are talking. I'm sure parents are hearing. The police end up becoming, wise of what's going on at Turkle's home. So by this time, she's in grade 7, I think. She's turned 13 years old. And he's, at this point, I don't believe he's with his wife anymore. Well, he couldn't have been. So Frank whisks her off to Mexico and illegally marries her in Mexico. And I'm guessing that he's doing this because the wife can't testify against her husband. Her parents had no idea this was going on. And they get back, the marriage isn't considered legal. People get word, the police get word of what's going on with the drugs and alcohol with the minors. So they get a search warrant and go and raid Frank's home. They don't find any drugs, but what they do find is they do find the pictures, and they find a recorder, a tape recorder, taped underneath his bed. And he's making audio recordings of him having sex with Jennifer, dating back to before she was 13. She was 12 at the time. The tapes are labeled and dated. Now, here's the crazy thing. Age of consent in Albuquerque in the 70s was 13 years old. Absolutely shocking at today's standards. You just can't imagine that. I mean, I have a 14-year-old child, and being with a 57-year-old man, just like, I would lose my mind. So he ends up getting arrested. Now, the trick for him was the difference between, he's insisting she was 13 at the time. Police were saying, okay, well, according to these notes on your pictures and recordings, she was 12. And the difference between 12 and 13 is 12, if she's 12, it's life in prison. If she's 13, it's consensual. So nothing happens to her. So Jennifer, at the time, in her first interview with police, she tells them she was 13. Now, she later claimed that it was because she was nervous and scared and didn't want the repercussions. And so she was going along with what Frank wanted her to say. But through the actual physical evidence that they found at the scene in Frank's home, they're like, no, she's 12. And one of the craziest things, her defense lawyer says during his trial, because he married Jennifer in Mexico in 1977, he was being charged with having premarital sex with his wife. And he was basically like, this case is a farce. Like, why are we wasting the taxpayers' money? It was one of the things he said. And he was like, basically, you're charging a man for having premarital sex with his wife. I mean, even if 13 is the age of consent, I mean, that's just absolutely disgusting. Anyway, so he ends up being found guilty based on the evidence that they found, and he gets thrown in jail. He got 10 years, but his lawyer on appeal was able to overturn the ruling because the search warrant was for drugs and not the tapes and the photos. So they found a loophole with that. And Frank's out. He's out of jail. Now, a couple of years pass. He's out of jail, ends up back with Jennifer. Now, we don't know how this happened. There's a lot of assumptions, but he ends up weaseling his way back into Jennifer's life. And then he marries her again on August 11, 1980 in Albuquerque when she was 18 years old. And when we found that out, like, I know there's a pattern sometimes of abused people going back to their abusers, and that's what I'm assuming would have been the case. But here's Shane talking about the discovering that she married him for a second time.
All right, so I'm going through my mail here. It says it's from the office of the county clerk, which is for Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm gonna open it here. All right, application for a marriage license. State of New Mexico to the county clerk office. The male was born May 16th, 1917. Ooh, that is very old. Female was born July 26th, 1962. All right, so it's dated August 5th, 1980, but it is between Frank Turkle and Jennifer Lynn Sherm. So it says at the bottom, which has the marriage information, that they got married on the 11th day of August, 1980 in Albuquerque. Ken Wood was the United Methodist minister, and the witnesses were Mina Wood, Alan Wood. It is a legitimate marriage license, which happened after that court date where she laid out his abuse, which is both sad and can't imagine what Frank would have done to trick her into marrying him again. Crazy. Disgusting.
Did he do it through blackmail? Did he forcefully get her to do it in some way, shape, or fashion? Or was it because she was still fearful of him? And we also wondered if maybe Frank arranged for the second marriage in order to prevent Jennifer from testifying against him when his case is overturned.
So,
hey, Tyler.
Yeah.
Everyone may know this, but whenever Tyler mentioned that, they said that that search where they found the cassette recorder or whatever underneath the bed, if the search warrant said they were looking for drugs, the argument then comes, did the police officer realize that when they took the recorder, were they taking the recorder because they felt there were drugs in the recorder and that's where they were hiding drugs? or did they feel that was some evidence of another crime that had been committed? So if you have a search warrant for drugs, you can actually look in just about any and everything. I've actually had a case where some of my guys on the NARC squad seized a recording device, and they said they thought there would be drugs in it. And the judge kind of said, there's always a possibility, but probably I know what was on your mind at the time, and you were looking to try to find another evidence of another crime other than what you had the search warrant for. So that made it easy for them to suppress that, and that's why it got out, is they had to suppress the audio tapes, because that was what we call fruits of the poisonous tree on a search. Had they seen that, and then when they found the Polaroids, had they went back and asked for another search warrant looking for evidence of exportation of a child, then they could have seized that audio recording device and been fine. I just wanted to clarify that. And by the way, Polaroids, for you young folks, they're actually instant pictures, that develop after they come out of the camera,
Oh, they know what it is.
I'm messing around. Okay.
So anyway, he goes back for he's out. He goes back for his second trial. They basically, Jennifer's family were like, we're not going to put her on the stand again. They don't want to do anything, but they agree to a plea deal. And the plea deal was 10 to 50 years. So he they wanted him to serve some time, and they threw it out of court. They basically suspend his sentence. Even after the family agreed for the plea deal, they end up suspending his sentence. And for reasons based, like sympathetic reasons, because of his age, poor health. And this is in the paperwork. Prisons are inherently dangerous for former police officers. Yeah, we all know that. So he didn't end up serving any more time. And I don't really know what ends up happening with him. I think somewhere one of our researchers found like the pictures of his headstone or whatever, but I don't know how the guy passed. And Jennifer ends up meeting a guy in Colorado and moving there. And it was with that man that she had her son, Andy. And that didn't work out. Basically, he had I guess there was a lot of arguments. There were some physical altercations. So she packs up and takes Andy back to Albuquerque, where her family is. And that's kind of how she ends up back in Albuquerque and starts doing the part-time sex work to help basically support her child. So Jennifer ends up on the cruise working and ends up getting hooked up to some very unsavory characters, is dating a man who was likened to Walter White, who's one of the major meth cooks in Albuquerque at the time. And then, of course, it leads to her untimely death. Certainly for us, when we were working on this case, we never expected the whole Turkle stuff. I mean, like that was just, mind-blowing. And then, what happens to her next and stuff. And, there's DNA's found on her, which could link her to one of the suspects for West Mesa. And yeah, it's crazy. The unfortunate part about it is there's no conclusion at this time. It still is an open investigation, and we are in contact with the cold case detectives. In fact, they were curious about what we were going to present in our podcast, because they were asking us, when are you releasing your episodes? But now, after producing this and everything, we start shopping around to produce it as a TV series. And Andy's cancer's come back. It's pancreatic. It's very aggressive. So he had moved out to New Orleans, and his cancer doctors are in Colorado. So we helped him with some flights to get back and forth to do his tests and also start his treatment. And we're planning a trip down to New Orleans to go and visit him sometime in the next few months. Basically, we're working around his treatments right now, and it's quite sad. Oh, and another really interesting thing is Andy actually produced a song for the series, which we close out the 4-part series with his song, which he basically talking about his mom and the experience and everything like that. So check out the episodes. Lots of interviews. We've got police, a former reporter, Mike Gallagher from the Albuquerque Journal, who wrote an entire series called Death on the Cruise. And Shane ends up connecting with him because he's coming up with his own theories while he's going through the case files. And then he reads this article, and sure enough, it's the exact same theory that Mike Gallagher had presented in his article. So yeah, it's nuts. And then with the tying with West Mesa is crazy. And yeah, that's it.
I have a factoid that might amaze you. So my mom was living in Albuquerque in 85, and someone she worked with lived in that apartment complex, and they actually have papers about her, about Jennifer.
Wow.
Because you
Yeah.
start talking about it, and then I'm like, hold on, I gotta look up this apartment complex. And
Yeah.
that is the same exact apartment complex my mom's friend lived in. And she was
Wow.
talking about how she knew that girl.
That's crazy. That is
And
great.
then I started looking her up, and I just remember the pictures of like one of the papers from Albuquerque. And my aunt, my other aunt, she would totally know about it, because if I told her, hey, do you remember this? She'd be like, yeah, in 85, da da da.
Yeah, that's crazy. We've got a folder with absolutely every article that's been written about her. And there was surprisingly, there was a lot.
There was a lot.
Yeah, there was the coverage, the detective work that was done at the time was just, I mean, it was just so out of character from everything else we've ever done before, anything we've covered. You know, you're not going to get anybody talking to you. And we had the detectives that actually worked the murder part of her case. And because, you know, we also had the detective we have on our episode was the guy he was the drug detective, and he was dealing with the boyfriend who was cooking meth. But right, like 11th hour, the absolute 11th hour, we had set up, we were going to interview these three detectives, and they used to get together at this diner and talk about cases. So we know a podcaster in Albuquerque, and he was going to go down and interview them, and we were going to get them at this restaurant, sitting around the table having this conversation. And in the 11th hour, they completely ghosted us. They didn't, but that happens. That happens. Yeah, this case is, it's quite remarkable. Although we never really, I mean, we got answers for Andy, but we didn't get any kind of conclusion. But we were able to tell him a lot more about his mother that he didn't even know, because his family was pretty tight-lipped about the whole situation. So
Well,
yeah.
tragedy is hard on a family. So
Yeah. Any other questions? You want to know about podcasting? Is anybody, you guys are doing a podcast, right?
yes, we are.
Kirsten
Kind of.
has raised her hand. Go.
Yes, sir. Okay, so I was wondering, how do you deconstruct these stories and build that narrative? What's your formula? Like, do you have a formula? Is there?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say a formula per se, but generally you go over the case files, you're going to do an outline, and then you're going to go and do your interviews. After the interviews are done, you get it transcribed, and then somebody's got to go through it and basically cherry pick the information they want out of that. Do your outline, do your interviews, and then what you do is you come up with a rough script, the narrative of me talking around all of this. Like when I played that first clip, how, you know, it cut in with me going, oh, and then Andy, this happened, da 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 da. And then Andy talks, because I set everything up. You're never going to hear like a two-way conversation with me and somebody else, because quite frankly, most of the time I'm not even the one doing the interviews. It's generally Beck. My wife will do the interviews, or Ryan does the interviews, or whatever writer is working on that case will do the interviews. And then it basically just comes to me, and I do my narration, and then it gets cut. Everything gets cut around it. And like I said, this was 2 years, and I'm not going to exaggerate, probably at a cost of about 20 grand for us to do these episodes. So, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of work, because, you know, we have to pay people for the time. You know, there's going to be requests and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it just went on and on and on. My preference in the format that I chose for this show, I would rather have the people involved in the case talking about the events than myself, because to me, it's more authentic when you're actually hearing the people who were involved in it talking about it versus me going, okay, and then this happened, and this happened. You know, I much prefer hearing it from the people who were involved. So, you know, and this is even why we got Ryan on the episodes. Our writer's never been on an episode before, but he did so much work, and he had to, you know, formulate this whole, you know, craft these 4 episodes. He was so hip deep in it. It was crazy not to have him involved, because he had his own challenges trying to produce his episodes. I mean, the first one is not only just about the case, but it's also about how we got involved and how this whole thing started.
Do you have to, or do you compensate your guests?
Some yes, some no. Now, if I'm doing an author, who wrote a book, and I'm going to do an episode with them, and they're promoting their book through all that, then no, because 99% of the times they're coming to us asking us to do that. But it's a fine line on what you're supposed to do, because you don't necessarily want to go to a victim's family and say, hey, I'm going to pay you to come on our show. I mean, it's kind of greasy. You don't want to be doing that. So it all depends on the situation. Any kind of professional, yes, they get paid because they need to be paid for the time because of what they do for a living. I've gone on tons of podcasts before and talked to them. No, I've never got a cent. I'm doing a TV documentary in a couple of weeks, and they offered me a $25 card for gas to get to the shoot, and I didn't even accept it. I'm like, $25 won't even get me out of the city in my truck.
And as a podcaster, what podcasts do you listen to if you have time to do that?
I do. I listen to them at night when I go to bed. I always have an earbud in. I've been doing that my entire life. It was all the old time radios, audiobooks. And my absolute favorite is not true crime. It's a show called Astonishing Legends. And they are like myths, urban legends, paranormal. They covered Amelia Earhart, the Bigfoot tapes. I love the banter between the two of them. And actually, I've been fortunate enough to actually meet them. So I know them now. They're on our network. So we did a cross promotion, and I'd been supporting them on Patreon for years. And so we got to know them. Dateline. I listened to Dateline when I listened to my true crime, and I know them. Josh Mankiewicz has called me at home before, which was a pretty awesome thing to happen. Euphemet, it's another paranormal one. I like the horror and the paranormal stuff when I'm not listening to true crime. I spend my day, like every single day, I'm talking about, murder and despair. So I generally like a little bit of a palate cleanser with paranormal stuff.
And we have another question from Josie.
Do you ever listen to That's Why We Drink? Because they used to do crime and paranormal.
Yeah, they do both.
Right.
I've listened to it a couple times. We were on the same network with each other. I think I may have talked to one of them, but I'm not sure. True crime podcasters, we all pretty much know each other, especially from when I started. We had, Facebook groups, and people would talk to each other, and you get to know other hosts and stuff.
I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I'm super busy with school. It just consumes everything. So
yeah. And it's the same with me. I mean, it's nice when it's your full-time job, because I'm setting my own schedule. So there are days I get to listen. Right now I'm on an audiobook kick. I've been listening to audiobooks. We watched, I guess, what Lost was finally, it was released on Netflix a few months ago, and I actually had never watched it and sat down and watched the whole series. And now I'm listening to an audiobook on Lost.
And we have a question from Kirsten.
I was wondering, do you have a special way of getting your information? Is there a source, a database, or do you just do a bunch of searches on the internet? What is your
internet searches? I mean, you got Pacer and FOIA requests. Ideally, we want to go to the people who are involved and have them tell the story, and we're gonna, get them to tell it. It depends on the writer. We have some writers that go after the people involved and aren't afraid to, make the cold calls or send the emails. And we have other ones that just will go by, what's available online and YouTube and stuff. So, it all depends on the case. We do have some criterias, we definitely want to get, court audio or some kind of, 911 calls or some kind of audio involved in there. We do, as far as rules on the show is, we don't cover cases with children. We did do a case in a young boy who was in foster care and was killed by the foster parents. And I had to record that script twice just because the first time I couldn't even get through it. I was choking up. It was just heartbreaking, this story. Now, we have covered cases where, it's a family or it's, whatever. We will never just focus on an episode just on a child. And then it's like, no gangs, no terrorism, no organized crime. Although I did do an episode of a former mafia enforcer, but he went to prison, found God, came out, and he's not involved in that lifestyle anymore. And he's a super nice guy. And now I actually salmon fish with him now.
Be careful.
Next week, I'm driving to Michigan to do a week of fishing with a former mafia enforcer. Kind of crazy how life takes turns.
Any advice for anybody who wants to get into podcasting, especially in this genre?
Do it. There's an audience for everything. you'll get listeners. You just gotta, you gotta commit. And if you commit, the number one piece of advice I can give to be successful is stick to a release schedule. Even if you got like 10, 15 listeners, if they know this such and such time during the week, they're going to get new content, they're going to listen. So, learn how to do it. And if you're going to release, I always say release 3 episodes at once when you come out of the gate, because you got all the time in the world to produce those 3 episodes. But if you're sticking with a release schedule after that, obviously your time frame between producing episodes shortens. And the reason I say 3, and it's pretty much a general rule in podcasting, and that is that you're giving the audience enough material to get hooked. So, they're going to get a really good idea of the show, and if I want to keep listening, and then that's what hits that subscribe or follow button, and they're going to be listening.
Create a Minds of Madness production company, and you get them to sponsor you. Okay. Yeah. That's how you do it.
It's just get up in the morning, get out here. I'm recording and I'm screening episodes and mixing. I mix the episodes.
So based on everything you've said, though, Tyler, that it seems like you get kind of everything kind of handed to you, and then you get, where you now are at the level of just everybody does the work for you, and then they give it to you, and you just have to narrate it pretty well,
more or less,
to the standards of your significant other.
Yeah.
Now, don't hate me for joking around. I like to joke around. Okay.
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true. But I worked 2 full-time jobs for 6.5 years. I mean, I had one complete mental breakdown. I lost my mind. I was so overworked. I ended up taking a leave of absence from work because I was just so stressed. It took a huge toll, and a huge toll on the family too. So, I would go to my day job, come home, and my work was physical. I was in telecom, and my title was communications technician. I was the guy who built all the big fiber optic backhaul equipment, for internet and data. And so I would be lifting up 150-pound chassis, screwing them into the things, doing all the power work, running all the cables and stuff. So I'd come home absolutely exhausted, and it would be like, oh, I got 2 pages or 5 pages to record, and the house would have to go silent. And I would, I wouldn't want to eat dinner because I don't want to get any mush mouth and while I'm talking. So I'm, can't eat, go downstairs. I'm trying to record. A kid flushes the toilet. I'm like, it was crazy. So I think I earned where I got to where I am.
Do we have any other questions, or have we kept him long enough?
I think we just wanted to say thank you so much. Thanks for your time. And
oh yeah, you're very welcome. I enjoy doing these talks. When your passion and your hobbies and your passion end up becoming your profession, it's a remarkable thing to happen. And I feel very lucky, and I work with such talented people, and I mean, it's been great. I mean, the subject matter is hard sometimes to deal with, but sometimes we've had worked with families, and they said it was very cathartic to tell their story, or sometimes their story is not, it's in the news for like 10 minutes and then they move on to something else. And like, just the one that always blows my mind was the Vegas shooting, one of the largest shooting on US soil. And it was like in the news for like a week, and then it was on to something else. And we did an episode, and somebody who was there was on the show with us, and they said, we really appreciate you doing this because you're bringing this case that, the family never stops thinking about it, and they never move on to anything else. They're stuck with this horrible tragedy in their life for the rest of their lives. So we get to give them a platform to bring it back into the public's eye or ear, and it's great. I mean, there's been some fantastic milestones doing this job.
We thank you very much, though. I appreciate it. And you gave us a lot of good information.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you. I hope I made sense.
You did. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters, with additional post services provided by audio photosynthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her, because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm JR Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.